Bedtime is supposed to be a happy event for a child. For me, it was terrifying. While some children might complain about being put to bed before they have finished watching a film or playing their favorite video game, when I was a child, nighttime was something to truly fear. Somewhere in the back of my mind, it still is. As someone who is trained in sciences, I cannot prove that what happened to me was objectively real, but I can swear that what I experienced was genuine horror. A fear in which my life, I am glad to say, has never been equaled. I will relate to you now as best I can, make it of it what I will, but I'll be glad to just get it off my chest. I can't remember exactly when it started, but my apprehension towards falling asleep seemed to correspond with me being moved into my own room. I was 8 years old at the time, and until then, I had shared a room quite happily with my older brother. As it is perfectly understandable, for a girl 5 years my senior, my brother equally wished for a room of his own as a result. I was given the room at the back of the house. It was a small, narrow, yet oddly elongated room, large enough for a bed and a couple of chest drawers, but not much else. I couldn't really complain because, even at that age, I understood that we didn't have a large house, and I had no cause to be disappointed, as my family was both loving and caring. It was a happy childhood during the day. A solitary window looked into the back garden, nothing out of the ordinary, but even during the daylight which crept into the room seemed almost hesitant. As my brother was given a new bed, I was given bunk beds, which we used to share. While I was upset about sleeping on my own, I was excited at the thought of being able to sleep on the top bunk, which seemed far more adventurous to me. From the very first night, I remember a strange feeling of unease creeping up on the back of my mind. I lay on the top bunk, staring down at my action figures in cars strewn across the green-blue carpet, as imaginary battles and adventures took place between the toys on the floor. I couldn't help but feel that my eyes were slowly being drawn towards the bottom bunk, as if something was moving out of the corner of my eye, something which did not want to be seen. The bunk was empty, impeccably made with a dark blue blanket tucked in neatly, partially covering two rather bland white pillows. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I was a child, and noise still slipping under my door from my parents' television bathed me with a warm sense of safety and well-being. I fell asleep. When you awaken from a deep sleep to something moving or stirring, it can take a few moments for you to truly understand what is happening. A fog of sleep hangs over your eyes and ears when it's lucid. Something was moving. There was no doubt about that. At first, I wasn't sure what it was. Everything was dark, almost pitch black. But there was enough light creeping in from the outside to an outline of a very narrowly suffocating room. Two thoughts appeared in my mind almost simultaneously. The first was that my parents were in bed because the rest of the house lay in both darkness and silence. The second, the thought turned into a noise which had obviously awoken me. As the last cobwebs of sleep withered from my mind, the noise took on a more familiar form. Something the simplest of sounds can be, but the most unnerving. A cold whistling through a tree outside. A neighbor's footsteps, uncomfortably close. Or, in this case, the simple sound of sheets rustling in the dark. That was it. Bed sheets rustling in the dark, as if some disturbed sleeper was attempting to get to a comfortable position on the bottom bunk. I lay there in disbelief, thinking that the noise was either my imagination or perhaps just my pet cat finding somewhere comfortable to spend the night. It was then that I noticed my door had been shut as I had fallen asleep. Perhaps my mom had checked on me and the cat had sneaked into my room then? Yes, that must have been it. I turned to face the wall, closing my eyes in vain hope that I could fall back to sleep. As I moved, the rustling noise from under me ceased. I thought that I must have disturbed my cat, but quickly I realized that the visitor on the bottom bunk was much less mundane than my pet cat trying to sleep, and much more sinister. As if alerted to this distinguished by my presence, the disturbed sleeper began to toss and turn violently, like a child having a tantrum in their bed. I could hear sheets twist and turn, and with increasing ferocity, fear then gripped me. Not like a subtle sense of unease that I had experienced earlier, but now a potent and terrifying. My heart raced as my eyes panicked, scanning the almost impenetrable darkness. I let out a cry. As most young girls do, I instinctively shouted for my mother. I could hear something stir on the other side of the house, but as I began to breathe a sigh of relief, my parents were coming to save me. The bunk bed suddenly started to shake violently, as if gripped by an earthquake. Scraping against the wall, I could hear the sheets below me thrashing around and tormented by malice. I didn't want to jump down to safety, as I feared the thing on the bottom bunk would reach out and grab me, pulling me into the darkness. So I stayed there, white knuckles clutching my own blanket as a shroud of protection. The wait seemed like an eternity. The door finally and thankfully burst open, and I lay bathed in light while the bottom bunk in the resting place of an unaware visitor lay empty and peaceful. I cried as my mother consoled me. Tears of fear followed my relief streamed down my face. Yet, through all of the horror and relief, I did not tell her why I was so upset. I cannot explain it, but it was though that whatever had been in that bunk would return if I so much as spoke of it or uttered a single syllable of its existence. Whether it was the truth, I don't know. But as a child, the fear and menace remained close to listening. My mother lay in the empty bunk, promising to stay there until morning. Eventually, my anxiety diminished, tiredness pushed me back towards sleep. But I remained restless, waking several times momentarily to the sound of rustling of bedsheets. I remember the next day waiting to go anywhere, be anywhere, but that narrow, suffocating room. It was a Saturday, and I played outside quite happily with my friends. Although our house was not large, we were lucky to have a long, sloping backyard. We played there often. As much it was overgrown, and we could hide in the bushes, climbed in huge sycamore trees, which towards above all else, and easily imagine ourselves as thrones of grand adventure or some untamed exotic land. As fun as it all was, occasionally my eye would turn up towards the small window. Ordinary, sight, and inconspicuous. But for me, that thin boundary that was the looking glass into a strange, cold pocket of dread. Outside, the lush green surrounding of the garden, filled with smiling faces of my friends, could not extinguish the creeping feeling crawling my way into its spine. Each hair stood on end. The feeling of something in that room, watching me play, waiting for the night when I would be alone, eagerly filled me with hate. It may sound strange to you, but by the time my parents ushered me back into that room at night, I said nothing. I didn't protest. I didn't even make an excuse to why I couldn't sleep there. I simply and sullenly walked into the room, climbed the few steps to the top bunk, and then waited. As an adult, I would have been telling everyone about my experience. But even at that age, I felt almost silly to be talking about something which I had really no evidence for. I would be lying, however, if I said that my primary reason, I still felt that this would enrage it if I spoke of it. It's funny how certain words can remain hidden from your mind, no matter how blatant or obvious they are. One word came to me that night. Laying in the darkness alone, frightened, unaware of the rotten change in the atmosphere, a thickening of the air as if something had displaced it. As I heard the first casual twists of the sheet below, my first anxious increased. My heartbeat increased too, as the realization that something was once again on the bottom bunk. That word, a word which had been so sent into exile, filtered up through my consciousness, breaking free of all repression, gasping and screaming for air, and carving itself into my mind. Ghost. As the thought came to me, I noticed how unwelcome visitor had ceased to move. The bed sheets lay calm and dormant, but had been replaced by something more hideous. A slow, rhythmic breathing of air. Heaved and escaped from the thing below. I couldn't imagine its chest, raising and falling with each gasping, wheezing, gargled breath. I suddenly and hoped beyond all hope that I would leave without occurrence. The house lay as it had the previous night, in a thick blanket of darkness. Silence prevailed, but as for the prevented breathing of my yet unseen bunkmate, I lay there terrified. I just wanted the thing to go and leave me alone. What did it want? When something unmistakably chilling transferred my mind. It moved in a way different from before. When it threw itself on the bottom bunk, it seemed unrestrained, without purpose, almost animalistic. This movement, however, was driven by awareness, with purpose, with a goal in its mind. For that thing laying there in the darkness, that thing which seemed intent on terrorizing a young girl, calmly and nonchalantly sat up. Its labored breathing had become louder, as now only a mattress and a few flimsy wooden slates separated my body from the unearthly breath below. I lay there, my eyes filled with tears. A fear of mere words cannot relate to you or anyone else occurred through my veins. I would not have believed that this fear could have been heightened, but I was wrong. I imagined that the thing would look like, sitting there, listening from below my mattress, hoping to catch the slightest hint that I was awake. Imagination then turned into an unnervingly reality. It began to touch the wooden slates on the mattress it sat on. It seemed to caress them carefully, running what I imagined to be fingers and a hand across the surface of the wood. Then, with a great force, it provided angrily between the two slats in the mattress. Even though there was padding, it felt as though somebody had viciously stuck their fingers into my side. I let out an almighty cry, and the wheezing, shaking, and head moving to the bunk below replied in a kind but violently vibrating as the bunk as it had done the night before. Small flakes of paint powdered onto my blanket from the wall as the frame in the bed scraped along backwards and forwards. Once again I was bathed in light. There my mother stood, loving, caring as she always was, with a comfort and hug, calming words which eventually subdued my hysteria. Of course, she asked what was wrong, but I couldn't say. I dared not say. I simply said one word over and over again. Nightmare. This pattern of events continued for weeks, if not months. Night after night, I would be awakened by the sound of rustling sheets. Each time, I would scream as to not provide the abomination with the time to prod or to feel for me, which each cry in the bed would shake violently, stopped by the arrival of my mother, who would spend the rest of the night with me on the bottom bunk, seemingly unaware of the sinister force that had been torturing me. Along the way, I managed to feign an illness, which a few times had come up other than less than truthful reasons for sleeping in my parents' bed, but more often than not, I would be alone for the first few hours of each night, in that place, the room with the light outside that did not sit right, alone with that thing. With time, you can become desensitized to almost anything, no matter how horrific. I had become to realize that, for whatever reason, this thing would not harm me when my mother was present. I'm sure that the same would have been for my father, but as loving as he was, waking him up from sleep was almost impossible. After a few months, I had grown accustomed to my nightly visitor. I did not mistake this for some unearthly friendship. I did not detest this thing. I feared it greatly, as I could almost sense its desires and its personality, if you could call it that. One filled with a prevented and twisted hatred, yet longing for me, of perhaps all things. My greatest fears were realized in the winter. The day grew short, and the nights grew longer, merely provided this wretch with more opportunities. It was a difficult time for my family. My grandmother, a wonderfully kind and gentle woman, had greatly deteriorated since the death of my grandfather. My mother was trying her best to keep her in the community as long as possible. However, dementia is a cruel and degenerative illness, robbing a person of their memories one day at a time. Soon, she recognized none of us, and it had become clear that she would need to be moved from her house to a nursing home. Before she could be moved, my grandmother had practically difficult few nights with my mother, and decided that she would stay with her. As much as I loved my grandmother, I felt nothing but anguish at her illness. To this day, I feel guilty that my first thoughts were not of her, but were of my nightly visitor, should it become aware of my mother's absence. her presence being the one thing that I was sure was protecting me from the full horror of the thing's reach. I rushed home from school that day, immediately wretched by the sheets and the mattress from the lower bunk, moving all of the slats and placing them on an old desk, a chest of drawers, and some chairs that which kept in a cupboard in the bottom bunk used to be. I told my father that I was making an office, which he found adorable, but I would be damned if I was going to let that thing in the place to sleep one more night. As darkness approached, I lay there, knowing my mother was not in the house. I did not know what to do. My only impulse was to sneak into her jewelry box and take a family crucifix, which I had seen there before. While my family was not very religious at that age, I still believed in God and hoped that somehow this would protect me. Although fearful and anxious, while I gripped the crucifix under my pillow tightly in one hand, sleep eventually came to me as I drifted off into a dream. I hoped that I would be awakened in the morning without any evidence. Unfortunately, that night was the most terrifying of all. I woke gradually. The room was once again dark. As my eyes adjusted, I could greatly make out a window from the door, to the walls, to some toys on the shelf. Even to this day, I shudder if I think about it. For there was no noise, no rustling of sheets, no movement at all. The room felt lifeless. Lifeless, yet not empty. The nightly visitor, that unwelcomed, wheezing, hateful thing which had terrorized me night after night, was not on the bottom bunk. It was in my bed. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out at all. Utter terror had shaken this very sound from my voice. I lay motionless. If I could not scream, I did not want to let it know I was awake. I had not yet seen it. I could only feel it. It was obscured under my blanket. I could feel its outline, that I could never feel its presence, but I dared not look. The weight of its pressure on top me, a sensation I will never forget. When I lay there, hours passed. I'm not exaggerating. Laying there motionless in the darkness, I was every bit scared and frightened. If there had been one thing during the summer months, it would have been the light by then. But the grasp of winter is long and unrelenting, and I knew it would be hours before sunrise. A sunrise which I yearned for. I was a timid child by nature, but I reached a breaking point, a moment where I could wait no more, where I could only survive under this immediate deviant abomination no longer. Fear can sometimes wear you out, make you threadbare, a shell of nerves leaving you only the slightest trace of you behind. I had to get out of bed. When I remembered my crucifix, my hand still unlaid underneath the pillow, but it was empty. I slowly moved my wrist around to find it, minimizing as best I could the sound of the vibration caused, but it could not be found. I either knocked it off the top bunk, or I could not even think of it. It had been taken from my hand. Without the crucifix, I lost any sense of hope. Even at such a young age, you can be actually aware of what death is, the intensity frightening of it. I knew I was going to die in that bed if I lay there, dormant, passive, do nothing. I had to leave the room. But how? Should I leap from the bed and hope to make it to the door? What if it was faster than me? Or should I only slowly slip from the top bunk, hoping not to disturb my uncanny bedfellow? Realizing that it had not stirred when I moved, trying to find the crucifix, I began to have the slightest, strangest thoughts. What if it was asleep? It hadn't so much as breathed since I had woken up. Perhaps it was resting, believing that it had finally got me, and that I was finally in its grasp. Or perhaps it was toying with me. After all, it had been doing that for countless nights. And now, with me under it, pinned against the mattress with no longer my mother to protect me, maybe it was holding off, savoring its victory until the last possible moment, like a wild animal savoring its prey. I tried to breathe as shallow as possible, and mustering every ounce of courage I could, I reached over very slowly with my right hand and began to peel the blanket off of me. What I found under those covers almost stopped my heart. I didn't see it, but as my hand moved the blanket, it brushed against something smooth and cold, something which felt unmistakably like a gaunt hand. I held my breath in terror, as I was sure it must have known that I was awake now. Nothing. It did not so much as stir. It felt dead. After a few moments, I placed my hands carefully further down the blanket as I felt a thin, poorly formed forearm. My confidence, as I almost twisted sense of curiosity, grew as I moved down further. The arm was outstretched, lying across my chest, the hand resting on my left shoulder, as if it grabbed me in my sleep. I realized that I would have to move this decayed appendage if I was going to hope to escape. For some reason, the feeling of torn, ragged clothing on the shoulder of this nighttime invader stopped me in my tracks, for once again swelled in my stomach and my chest, as I recoiled my hand in disgust at the touch of the strangled, oily hair. I could not bring myself to touch its face, although I wondered to this very day what it had felt like. Dear God, it moved. It moved. It was subtle, but its grip on my shoulder that lay across my body strengthened. No tears came, but God, how I wanted to cry, as its hands and arms slowly coiled around me. My right leg brushed along the cool wall. Of all that happened to me in that room, this was the strangest. I realized that this clutching, rancid thing that drew great delight from violating me in bed was not entirely on top of me, but sticking out of the wall like a spider striking from its lair. Suddenly, its group moved from a sudden squeeze to an aggressive one. It pulled and clawed at my clothes, as if frightened at the opportunity that would soon pass. I fought against it, but emancipated arm was too strong for me. Its head rose up, withering and contouring under the blanket, and now realized where it was taking me. Into the wall! I fought for dear life. I cried, and suddenly my voice turned to me, yelling, screaming, but no one came. I realized why it was so eager to strike, why this thing had to have me now. Through my window, the window that seemed to represent so much malice from outside, streaked hope, the first ray of sunshine. I struggled further, knowing that if I could just hold on, it would be gone soon. As I fought for my life, an unearthly parasite shifted, slowly pulling itself up my chest, its head now poking out from under the blanket, wheezing, coughing, rasping. I don't remember its features. I simply remember its breath against my face, foul and as cold as ice. As the sun rose over the horizon, the dark place in the suffocating room of contempt was washed, bathed in sunlight. I passed out as a few scrawny fingers encircled my neck, squeezing the very life from me. I awoke to my father offering me some breakfast. A wonderful sight indeed. I had survived the most horrible experience of my life then, and now I moved the bed away from the wall, leaving behind the furniture I had believed would stop it from taking the bed. Little did I think that it would take mine and me. Weeks passed without an incident, yet one cold frostbitten night, I woke to the sound of furniture where the bunk used to be, vibrating violently. In a moment it passed, I lay there sure it could hear the distinct wheezing coming from the deep within the wall, finally fading into the distance. I have never told anyone about this story before. To this day, I still break out in a cold sweat at the sound of bedsheets rustling in the night, or a wheeze brought to a common cold. I certainly never sleep in my bed against the wall. Call it superstition if you will, but as I said, I cannot discount conventionally explains such sleep paralysis, hallucination, or an overactive imagination. But what I can say is this. The following year, I was given a room larger on the other side of the house, and my parents took me away from that suffocating, elongated place of a bedroom. They said they didn't need a larger room, just one big enough for a bed and a few things. They lasted 10 days, and we moved on the 11th.